I was invited to speak at a conference last week. It was called the Ummah Tech conference. And the one nagging feeling that I had there that I couldn't resolve, but afterwards when I was at the airport lounge and on the flight back, I got thinking about what was that feeling that I had. And the feeling I realized was that while I was at the conference, I felt like the dumbest one in the room. And I'm not just saying that metaphorically, I'm saying that in reality, because although I was a speaker at the conference, I was so awestruck by the caliber of some of the other speakers that I realized that there's so much that I can learn from them, and there's so much I would love to learn from them. And what was the worst part is many of them were absolutely young. They were very, very young. But that didn't stop them from becoming experts in their fields, whether it was in artificial intelligence or it was in content creation, digital marketing, digital entrepreneurship, software engineering. We had people there at the conference who spoke across the gambit of technologies or technology careers that are available, that people are doing here in South Africa. But when I say that I felt like the dumbest one in the room, I don't mean to be complaining, because in this day and age when everybody wants to be the biggest and the best and to basically brag about who they are and what they have, I think it's nice to be reminded every now and again that no matter how clever you think you are, no matter how clever others think you are, there are always people who are much smarter than you, much more intelligent, much more learned, and much more experienced than you are. Now, in my life as a CEO of a company, everybody naturally expects me to be the smartest one in the room. Whenever everybody's stuck, all heads in the meeting, in the boardroom will turn to me. Even people I mentor from other companies think I'm such a smart fellow. But it was refreshing for me, and it was humbling to go into that room, to see entrepreneurs who are much more successful and wiser than I am, technologists who are much more in tune with the tech than I am, people, learned people who had knowledge beyond anything that I could imagine. Now there's something that's worth envying. That kind of knowledge, that kind of wisdom, that's something to be envied. Not money, not wealth, not people's material possessions. But anyways, I digress. So here I was at this conference and listening to all these amazing talks. And I think my greatest takeaway, as much as I learned a lot of things, my greatest takeaway was that feeling of humility, and I'm grateful for that. So what did I learn at the conference? Now, some of the things that I found completely astounding was when there was this guy who was so young. I think he was, if I didn't know that he was already studying towards his PhD, I would think that this guy is still in high school. So he spoke about AI because he's a researcher in AI, and particularly generative AI. And some of the things he said were really truly amazing, which was, for example, that as much as he spent so many years studying AI, and as much as there are so many AI experts out there, really no one knows what AI is and how it works, how it functions. In other words, as much as we've created AI and we've written the initial code for an AI like ChatGPT, it's kind of gone in a direction that we didn't envisage, that we could not have predicted. And now it's pretty much doing its own thing. So it's kind of, the analogy I can think of is of a snowball. What we've done as human beings is that we've created this little snowball and we've set it rolling. And that snowball is picking up mass and picking up momentum as it's going down the hill, and it's become an avalanche now. So the snowball effect is what we basically initiated, and now it's taking things over from there. Another thing that I learned at the conference was about viral videos. As much as I'm on YouTube and I'm on TikTok, it's always great to learn about how other people are doing it. So there was this young lady who's created videos that went to 4 million, 5 million views, which is something that I've never had the opportunity to do. And interestingly enough, I've got a meeting with her today to establish how she can play a role in my content game, to improve my content game. Another talk that really moved me was where this youngster, who is also a very, very successful tech entrepreneur. I mean, his company's got LinkedIn, for example, as a client. He basically encouraged the audience to keep creating. He was encouraging creation. Now, what kind of creation? Creating anything that falls within your realm of expertise and experience. So, for example, things like if you're a software developer, just keep creating software and putting it onto GitHub and sharing it with the world. Who knows that maybe not the first or the second or the third app that you built is going to be the massive success. For example, Mark Zuckerberg, and this is one of the examples he gave us, Facebook, and this is something that I didn't know, that Facebook was actually the 5th app that he had created in his lifetime, from the time he was in high school till he was in university. And that was the only one that clicked. But that's all he needed, right? Just for that one to click and to make it big. And he's set up for life. And there was a question he asked us. And that's a question that I want to put to you. And the question is, what are you world class at? I don't mean what are you good at. I'm asking you, what are you world class at? First of all, we need to understand what's the meaning of world class. And then we need to understand that, are we self-aware enough to know that I have certain talents? Yes, I might have many talents, but which is the talent that I can go on any world stage and talk about with perfect confidence and as an expert, so that people can learn from me a thing or two. So those are some of the things that I took away. And to be perfectly honest, most of the talks, if not every one of them, were completely valuable. And I'd love to spend time with each one of the speakers. And just like today, I've set up the meeting with the young lady who spoke to us about going viral on social media. I'm going to be setting up meetings with every one of them, maybe just to talk over lunch, because my brain is like this sponge and it just wants to keep absorbing and absorbing and absorbing knowledge, which will be great. So what did I speak about? What was my little contribution to that conference? Now, first and foremost, I must say I was in a very unenviable situation because I got to speak last. And when you're the last speaker, you're almost the catch-all. You're the one that has to almost bring it back together, but at the same time, you have to be careful not to repeat what was already said. So if somebody in their talk already covered your main points, then you would be in serious trouble, right? Because then you need to basically change your points so that you don't sound like you're copying the other person or that you're just repeating the same old stuff, because it's already old news. People are impatient these days. But fortunately, I went up there and I delivered my thing, and I'm fortunate that no one tramped on my toes and spoke the things that I needed to speak. So what did I speak about? I spoke about a few things. The first thing I addressed the crowd on was, what is our vision for our children? Because if we as parents have this vision that I'm going to put my child through school and then through university, and then they'll get a degree, and then they'll go and get a job. Isn't that a bit basic? Isn't that a bit of a simplistic vision? Because that's what everybody is doing. That's what the whole world is doing, or aspiring to do in any case. Millions of students at schools around the world, at universities around the world, have the same aspiration. Don't you wish for something more for your kids? Don't you have something more for them, a vision that goes beyond just getting a job? And that's where I got people to really think about themselves as well as their kids, because my talk was about the next generation, right? That the title was Tomorrow's Tech Leaders. So I got them thinking in those lines, that you need to think beyond the utilitarian, the common, the simplistic journey of life, that this is what my child is going to do. And we need to be thinking about leadership in tech, particularly in a continent like Africa, where there are so many problems, and those problems all bring opportunities. So I got them thinking in that line. And then there was the next thing I spoke about. You see, I mentioned this a lot on my podcast as well as on my TikTok and my short form videos, that when I was teaching coding, and I think I might have mentioned this to you, but I'm going to mention it again nonetheless. When I was teaching coding to grade 8 learners, at that time I was also teaching maths to grade 8 learners. I found that the level of commitment and dedication that the kids displayed towards coding was infinitely more than they did in my maths classes. And I'm talking about the same kids here. I'm not talking about a different group of kids in maths and a different group of kids in my coding classes. I'm talking about the exact same group in both classes. And the example I gave, the story I gave, is of this one kid who actually found a shorter way to write an algorithm than I did. Now, his way of doing it, and I never told him this, wasn't the most elegant, but it was shorter. And it took a lot of thought to produce that code that he did. And so he came up and showed it to me. And I was so impressed that I took a photo of that occasion of my reviewing his code and testing it. But it got me thinking, and it sent me down a rabbit hole to try and understand, why are kids so demotivated when it comes to maths and languages and other subjects at school? But with their coding classes, they just excelled. And they didn't just excel in what I taught them. No. They took it much further. They went home. They did self-study. They went online. They went and watched YouTube videos. And they used the knowledge that they gained from there to upgrade the apps that I taught them to build, or the video games that I taught them to build. And they would come back the next day and show me something that was way, way, way beyond anything that I had taught them. So what was that motivation? And that sent me down the rabbit hole over the past few years to understand what motivates people to learn. Because in my opinion, and I think it's a fact, that the more you learn, the more you can do. And the more you can do, the more opportunities open up for you. And the more opportunities open up for you, the greater your chances of success. So for me, learning is that one thing that everybody needs to do. Everybody needs to fall in love with. And if I could send a child to school and they come out after 12 years of schooling with just one thing, which is the love of learning, then I would be happy and content that I've instilled in my student the love of learning. You know, I feel that every child is a little spark. And when they go to school, either that spark is extinguished or that spark is ignited until it becomes a roaring flame. It's the school, it's the education, it's the teacher that actually determine this. That's why you find some that come out of school completely extinguished, hating the idea of learning, hating the idea of just even poking their nose into a book. And then you got others who are high flyers. They go further and further up in life. Ask them, ask the successful ones, how did you succeed? Simple, just by learning constantly. But I digress there. Anyway, so I brought the topic back to these learners in my classes. And since then, this was about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, since then I've been researching constantly what is it about learning that motivates learners. And in the course of that, I discovered something. I discovered this, that in my maths lessons, I was actually teaching concepts. I was teaching concepts that focused on a microscopic level. Multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, as they went higher. Doing some fractions, higher up, doing exponents, equations, which meant what to the learners? Absolutely nothing. But in my coding classes, although I called it coding classes, but it wasn't coding at all, as far as the child was concerned. There, they were learning to build apps. They were learning to create websites. They were learning to develop video games, things that they could use themselves and share with the whole world, show to their parents, show to their friends, their cousins, their neighbors, their aunts and uncles, that this is what I created. And to have the pleasure and the joy of creating something that is in existence in the real world and sharing it with the world. Not just enjoying it themselves, but looking at others enjoy it. Because in my classes, the kids would swap games that they created, and then they would play each other's games, the games that each other created, and that was phenomenal. So that was the key difference there, that in the maths classes they were learning meaningless concepts, but in the coding classes they were learning how to build solutions. They were solving problems. And when you look at what the learning psychologists tell you, what they tell us, it's that the strongest kind of motivation in any learning is intrinsic motivation, where the person is motivated from inside. And that intrinsic motivation, most of the times, comes from the joy of creating something, of learning something, processing that knowledge, and using that knowledge to create something that is tangible. Now that's intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, where, for example, we drum some fear into them, that if you don't do this, you're not going to pass. Or if we offer a reward, if you do well in your exams, then dad is going to buy you a phone or a gaming console. That's extrinsic motivation. It works to an extent, but nothing works better than intrinsic motivation. And what I was doing, unwittingly, without even realizing at that time, because I hadn't gone down that rabbit hole of discovery, was I was applying intrinsic motivation with my learners. And they took to it like little ducklings to water, and they started to create. And many of them have gone on to pursue careers in software development now. With those few words, thanks so much for listening. I'll catch you next week.